My name is Glen Schmucker. I was fortunate to be the pastor here at the temple from 1998 to 2008. When I think back on my life here now in those years, and I have the perspective of time, I look back and realize that this was one of the single most life-transforming experiences I ever had. I don't know of any pastor who wouldn't say, I wish I'd known then what I know now. And I certainly am one of those. But I'm also just deeply touched by the honor of having been this church's pastor for 10 years. Some of the finest people I've ever known in my life were members here and still are, many of them. I came here from having gone through a divorce, and I really believed that my days in ministry were over. And one night my wife Nancy and I were out walking the dog, and I was expressing that sentiment to her, and she said, "Your God is too small." And I've never had anything change my life more than those words. And not long after that, Cliff Temple contacted me, and the next thing you know, I had a 10-year stay here. And I felt a grace and mercy that only a church that accepts people as they are could possibly deliver. I stepped into a church that was deeply steeped in local mission work. I've never known of another church. I'm sure they're out there, but I've just never personally known of a church that was more committed to its community than is this church. Back in the 1960s, when school integration was ordered, a lot of the churches, the white churches in this part of the city, migrated to the suburbs where there were more of their kind of people. The Cliff Temple made a determined decision to stay here and to be a church in this community. And I was constantly overwhelmed by that decision. It took a lot of courage and guts and a willingness to go through the social changes and even the numeric loss of membership to stay here. You can't go anywhere in this facility, especially in the sanctuary, without feeling a deep touch of history. The sanctuary in which I served is still there, and it was built in 1938. And it still has the charm and the historic milieu that bespeaks this church's commitment to this culture. I guess when I look back on it, most of all, I think the thing that was most challenging or wonderful to me were the people I met. I can remember so many. I'm afraid to name them. I do remember Bob Owen specifically because he was the chair of the search committee that called me here. And so, as tends to happen in many churches, the pastor and the chair of the search committee often become close confidants. And Bob was such a wise, compassionate, generous, and loving human being. His wisdom, as I like to say, saved my bacon more than once. He'd grown up here in this church. He'd gone on to his professional career and was still here, and had become one of the most significant pillars of this church. I could go on with a list of names that would just be impossible, and yet to say that I made some relationships here that changed my life then and still change my life when I reflect on the things that I learned from them. I don't have any clue what this church learned from me, but I have a deep sense of knowing what I learned from this church. And I stand by the fact that great pastors don't make great churches make great pastors, and I still believe that. I also remember Darrell Morgan, who was the pastor here back in the 60s, and he would come over from time to time and visit with me and gave me some guidance that I badly needed. It was so wise and so incredibly insightful of so many different things. And I enjoyed his friendship and his wisdom, and I still wish I could have conversations with him. I also remember some of the staff members. Again, I'm in a bind here because I could name scores of them. But I have to admit that two of the people that really did, three of the people that touched me deeply and affected my life deeply were, of course, Bud Lovell, who had been here for a score of years before I got here. he had become, in times of transition, de facto pastor in many ways for a lot of his people. And he was one to whom people could turn with absolute assurance and confidence. And he was such a jovial person, and yet so wise and insightful about the ways of people. And he was a phenomenal musician to boot. If I was ever down, I could spend some time with Bud, and I would always find myself encouraged. He was just a funny guy. And then I could name Michelle Collins, who had never trained for ministry. She'd gone to Baylor University and gotten a degree in education, I believe, but had never trained professionally for ministry, and yet to this day stands out in my memory as one of the finest children's ministers I ever knew, because it was who she was. It was in her heart, and her love for Christ and for children was just, you couldn't miss it. And of course there's Kenny Cheshire. Kenny has been so faithful to stay in touch with me over the years and encourage me. You never leave a church without some sadnesses, and Kenny's been the one that has helped me put a lot of that into perspective. But again, he was a man who did not train for professional ministry. He had trained in some other field at the University of Texas, and yet continued to stand out as a layperson here at Cliff Temple, as a man who had all the gifts of being a youth minister, just because that again was who he was. His love for people in general, but also love for people in this community, was inescapable. And I remember when he and I talked, I just told him the thing I needed him to do most was help us build a bridge to the Adamson High School right across from us. And he did it with very little direction from me. It was, I had to get out of Kenny's way. Again, he is such a jovial person, and yet at the same time helps me keep perspective about a lot of things as I look back. You never spend 10 years of your life doing anything, but you don't often reflect on that experience and the things that you learned from it. And of course, I wish I had known when I first came here what I know now. But I was here, and I did the best I could with what I had, and I feel good about that in so very, very many ways. Whatever I gave to this church, Cliff Temple Baptist Church, gave back to me 100-fold over in terms of love, compassion, understanding, support. I was here as the pastor when the church celebrated its 100th anniversary, and I remember that was such a bright day. And I congratulate Cliff Temple on its 125th anniversary. That's a remarkable achievement these days. Not many churches have a history of 125 years that are still vibrant and active and still growing deeper and deeper into the roots of the community, like Cliff Temple. It's a stellar church in so many ways. And I want to thank the church again for the privilege of having been here. I would also be very remiss if I didn't mention my wife Nancy, who was the person who really helped me keep a straight head on and keep focused on things that mattered and things that do not get focused on things that didn't matter. And I love her with all my heart, and I could not have been the pastor of this church without her as my wife. But again, to the church, I congratulate you on your 125th anniversary. I think that's just remarkable, and I'm glad in any way, shape, or form that I got to be a little part of it. God bless you.